Good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock on my watch, and let's start with this month's presentation. Welcome to everybody who have joined us on this topic of buying a house. This lunch hour presentations is much more informal, so if you would like to ask a question in between, please feel welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question. So, this afternoon we are talking about the roof over your head, and then especially if you want to buy your own property to stay in. So, I just want to warn you up front, we are not talking here specifically about investment property. This discussion this afternoon is about the roof over your head. So, buying a house for yourself. And what I'm going to share with you this afternoon comes a lot from own experience. I will share a lot of my own experience. If you have something to add, please join me. Why is it important to talk about buying a house? Because for most of us, ladies and gentlemen, it's the single biggest purchase that we will ever make. You can just think for yourself, what more expensive things, unless you have bought your house very long ago, there's not much else that you have bought that's more expensive than your house. And along with that, very few of us can really buy a house cash. So what happens is that we often have to take on some liabilities. So your house will probably also be your biggest liability. So not only from being an asset side, but also from being a liability, it's important to manage. And then along with that, overall, it can be your biggest monthly cost item. If you have to pay the mortgage and all the other costs that's involved with buying a house. So for that, because it is such a big decision, we need to really think about it. And for those of you that maybe have joined a few seconds late, don't worry, I am recording this. You will be able to watch it again. So I don't need to tell you this afternoon how big a decision buying a house is, and that's why you are here. So let's continue. What do I want to talk to you about this afternoon? Number one question that I often get asked is it better to buy or to rent? Then I want to share a few things that I found from, as I've said, from own experience that you need to consider. I want to talk about mortgages and other costs. And then linked with this being a very big liability, I want to give you a tip. And at this stage, I must confess, this comes from a very good colleague, Jaco Barnard, who has shared this with me. And I think it's probably one of the best tips that anybody can ever give you. And hopefully you'll end up with 2 paid-off properties after 20 years, where most people will only have 1. And you will see with the tip we are giving you, you won't have to change your living standard. So that's what I want to talk to you about this afternoon. Let's start with, is it better to buy or to rent? Now, if you want to consider this, maybe you have just started at CUT in Belkom or in Bloemfontein, and you're not sure how long you're going to stay there. Maybe you aspire to get a promotion to somewhere else. What should you consider? Now, the first thing I can tell you is go and Google New York Times buy versus rent. This screenshot that I have here is their buy versus rent calculator. So go and Google New York Times buy versus rent. Then they will ask you some information. If you rent this property, what will the monthly rental cost be? If you buy it, for how much can you buy it? Do you have to put down a deposit, and you can put in what percentage, whatever? What's the mortgage rate that the bank will give you? A percentage that will result in property taxes. And then if you buy, maybe you'll have some levies that you need to pay. The the cost of purchasing the house, we'll end up with that, but we can use 5% for now. For how many years is the mortgage going to be? So you can see they ask you to put in all these costs. What's going to be your annual maintenance cost as a percentage, your insurance as a percentage, and we have just worked with 1%, like with property taxes. In South Africa, if it's your own home that you are going to live in, we just put in the 500,000 capital gains exclusion, but if it's your own house that you stay in, you can actually make that 2.5 million. And then how much will you pay for electricity, etc. So they ask you a lot of information if you are going to buy, and then they say, well, if you click on renting, what percentage of deposit will you have to pay? Does the estate agent add some commission? What can you invest your savings in? Because if it's cheaper to rent, maybe you can invest the surplus and earn some interest on that. What's your marginal tax rate? So that's what's your maximum. At which rate are you going to be taxed? And what's the inflation rate? So a few things, and I always say, don't worry if you're out by 1 or 2%. It won't make that big a difference. And then, very nice, it gives you this calculator and this graph. And you can see how the value of your property will increase, etc. And you can play around at the top. Increases in the house price, increases in your rent, and it will change your graph. The most important thing, even with this example of mine, after 3 years, it's often better to buy. So if you plan to stay 3 years or longer, it's often better to buy a property. So we have done this with various scenarios, and it always works out around 3 years. So I can, at this stage, say that if you plan to live in a house for less than 3 years, it's probably better to rent. Why? Because of all the costs. If you buy the house, there's mortgage generation costs. You pay the estate agent fees. You have to register, or it's transport fees, etc. That 5% cost. So it takes you about 3 years to recover from that cost. And that's why it is, if you stay for a shorter period, your house's value will not increase sufficiently to make up for those costs. And for that reason, it's better to rather rent if you're going to stay for a short period of time. But if you're going to stay there for longer, or maybe after you move, you want to keep that property and rent it out, it will probably be better to buy. Does anybody have a question at this stage? So I'm an accountant, I like doing the maths, and that's why I like this calculator. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. Now, some important things to remember. There's a saying, when buying property, there's 3 things that are important. The location, location, location. Buy the property at the best location or in as good a neighborhood as you can for various reasons. It's all about resale value afterwards. Because if you buy a property that's close to schools, people that have children in schools will look for that. If you buy a property that's in a safe neighborhood, that will count extra to the value of your property. In the past, it was very nice to have parks and open areas around you. I have a lovely park in front of my house, but these days it is actually a risk because it makes easy access for criminals, etc. So take that into consideration. And then also not being too close to noisy roads, if you can get away from that. I was talking to friends over the weekend, and they just now moved to a quieter neighborhood, and they were living in a very busy road. And they said they can actually feel the calm in their household. Their dogs are not even stressed so much anymore, just because they are living in a more quieter neighborhood. Consider if you want to be close to the shops. If you forgot to buy bread or milk, are you prepared to drive 10, 20 minutes to just get something like that? And then it doesn't also mean that you just need to buy new neighborhoods, but look at that specific neighborhood. Are there developments in the area? Here in Porsche, in central of town, we see these days that a lot of young families moving in. They are renovating their houses. That makes it a good neighborhood to consider. But at the end, of course, the most important thing is, what can you afford? So my advice about location has always been, buy rather a smaller property at a good location than the biggest, best property in a bad location. Value-wise, to be able to sell it in the future, it will just be worthwhile to rather go for a better location. Then also plan for what you want and take your needs and wants into consideration. If you want 2 bedrooms, maybe one for you and your spouse and 1 child, but you know that sometime in the future you are going to have another child. Look, shouldn't you then now rather consider having a 3-bedroom place? Remember what I said earlier. If you are going to sell and move within 3 years, you'll probably make a loss. So we need to think a little bit ahead. Or maybe the 2 bedrooms will be fine, but there is room to build a 3rd bedroom. So it's important to just go and sit and jot down a few of your needs and wants. Do you want a swimming pool? Maybe you don't want it because it's a lot of work and it costs extra money. Do you want to study? Maybe you're working from home quite a lot and you need to study. Is there a place where you can actually close the door and the kids and the dogs and the cat and the whatever cannot come into the room? So make a list of your needs and wants. And I always say my needs, that's the things that's non-negotiable. I don't even go and look at the property if it does not meet my needs. I need a study, I need 3 bedrooms, I want 2 bathrooms. That's my minimum. Then once, yes, maybe if it has an alarm system, that's nice, but I can add it. I would like to have good security, but again, I can add it. So that will help you to filter down the properties that you are looking at. I hope that makes sense. Then a few tips, things that you need to look at. Have a good look at the roof. It can be very expensive to repair a roof that's leaking. So if you walk through the house, look at the ceilings, are there signs of a leaking roof? If you are standing outside and you look at the roof, is it flat, or do you see some wobbly, or do you see that maybe some tiles are have lifted? I can remember that before me and my wife bought the house that we are living in now, we went to look at a house that was quite nice, but when I looked at the roof, something just bothered me. And I remember phoning a guy who was repairing roof, and I told him, listen, Mr. Swanevelder, I will pay you, but please just come and have a look at this roof. So he got on the roof, got down, took me by the arm, led me aside and said, Jaco, stay away from this place. You're going to buy a lot of trouble. So I didn't buy that property. I spent a few $100 paying him for his advice. But if you think that you're going to buy a property of a few $100,000, maybe spending 1,000 or 2, not making a mistake, is worthwhile. Then we bought the house that we are currently living in. It has a flat roof. Now, people always tell you, stay away from flat roofs. Again, I had an engineering friend. I called him. I said, Philip, please come and have a look. We really love this house. He got on the roof, came down and said, no, Jaco, the angles are right. This roof is in good condition. So we bought the house. We are very happy with the house. Electricity certificate. Whenever you buy new property, the owner, the current owner, must issue you with an electricity certificate to say that all the electricity is working well. If you have concerns, pay for your own electrician to get that certificate. I have heard terrors of people buying properties that have to redo electricity and a lot of things afterwards. Look for cracks. Not all cracks are bad, but if it's at the foundations, you may need to worry, may need to get some advice. Look for water damage. If the paint is peeling from the walls, that's not a good sign. Often that water damage cannot be repaired. You can paint it, but it stays there forever. Rather stay away. If you are buying older houses with wooden floors, ask for a termite certificate to say that this place has been treated against termites. And then the last thing that you need to do is ask for a copy of the plans and make sure that every extension on that property has been approved by the city council. Because if it's not, the bank may actually not grant you your loan. Or in future, the city council may actually tell you to tear down parts of your house if there has not been plans approved for that. So make sure that you look at these things and that you don't fall for a trap or buy something that's going to cost you a lot of money in future. Then people always ask us about upgrading. Now, if you have bought your property and you want to add a bedroom or so, that's always good. The upgrading I'm talking about here is every 3 years, 5 years, buying a new house. And then I get clients at age 65, they want to retire and they still owe 1 million rands on their property. Then they have to take a lot of their pension money and pay off debt. If we look at our needs and wants, it will not be constantly necessary to upgrade. And we won't constantly want to go bigger and better and chasing the Joneses. To give you a good idea, in 1957, Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, purchased this 5-bedroom house. And at this stage, this was about middle 2015, he was still living there. It's a beautiful house. But one of the richest guys in the world didn't see the need to constantly upgrade. And then you look at all the sports stars and the movie stars, and you see their mansions. And then you wonder why often, after many years, they write about this star died bankrupt. They just spent all the money. So in the book, The Millionaire Next Door, there's actually a very good guideline. They say that your property should not be more than twice your annual income. So if I am earning 400,000 rands per year, my property, I should not buy a property that's more expensive than 800,000. Then I'm living within my means when I look at property. So you can go and test today the value of your property, or even if you are going to buy, have a look at what is really, according to your income, a good amount to pay for a property. Another thing that you need to consider, interest rates at the moment is at a 25-year low. So if you buy property today, chances are very good that interest rates will go up and in future you will pay more. I can remember when we just bought our property. It was at that stage with the Twin Towers, and when all of that happened and the world economies were shook, the interest rates went up, and every month I can remember when that interest rates goes up, I just thought for myself, I have another 1,000 rands less in my pocket. Next month it goes up with another percent. Oh my, I have another 1,000 rands less in my pocket. So you need to build in some leeway for yourself. Let's take an example. Let's say you buy a property for $1 million. So for every 100,000 in this example of mine, if you get 8% from the bank, you will 863 is your installment. So if we make it $1 million, I'm just going to add your installment is going to be 8,360. If interest rates goes up 1%, your installment is going to increase by 640 rands to 9,000 rands. If it goes up with another 1%, your installment is going to go up with another 650 rands. Every 1%, your installment almost increases with 600. So you must ask yourself, if my current installment is 8,360 rand, can I absorb a 2 or 3% interest rate? If I cannot afford that installment, maybe I should buy a property that's less expensive, so that when interest rate increases, I can still afford it. And you can see here, where interest rates now is 7 to 8%, 20% double your installment. That's not impossible. That time I was talking about, interest rates went up to about 20%. It was terrible. So make sure that you have enough leeway in your budget to afford increases in your installment. And you can ask any of us at Jen will email us if you want us to do these calculations with you, or ask the bank or the estate agent, hope they can do it. But ask people if you are not sure. Don't just close your eyes and hope that everything will work out. Ask us, we are there for you to help you do these calculations and help you to make a better decision at the end of the day. What's the costs involved? I've drawn two tables here, one for a property of 500,000 and one for $1 million. Now, transfer duty is only payable if you buy a property of more than 900,000 rands. So you will see that for the property of 500,000, there's no transfer duties. It's going to be 7,500 for the property of $1 million. Conveyance fees, that's what you will pay the attorneys and maybe some other costs. If you register a bond, that's more or less what they will charge you, the banks, the initiation fees, some other costs. So you can see that for a property of 500,000, you will probably have to pay 30,000 rands out of your pocket at 6%. For a property of $1 million, 52,000 for the costs, around 5.2%. You will remember that I said earlier when we looked at the buy versus rent, we worked on 5% costs. That's where we get it from. Sometimes the bank will borrow you this money if you're a first-time home buyer, but most often you will need to have this in cash to pay for those costs. So that's the first thing that you need to consider. Do I have the cost for the transfer, for registering the mortgage, etc., if the bank is not going to borrow me that? Then there are some other costs. And I've often seen when you rent, some of the costs are not carried by you. You pay the rent, the landlord takes care of a lot of the costs. But then, when it's your property, there's extra costs that we often don't budget for. So now, you're going to pay the property tax as well. That's normally paid by the landlord. Then there's insurance. Two types. The short-term insurance to safeguard your property so that when it burns down, when somebody breaks in, that damages are covered. And then sometimes the banks will also require of you to take out life insurance so that when you die, that debt is paid. Can I just give you a little tip here? Don't just accept their life insurance. The bank's life insurance, that credit life insurance, is often much more expensive than the insurance you can get at companies like Sanlam, Old Mutual, etc. And they must, by law, accept if you provide alternative insurance. They cannot force you to make use of the bank's insurance. Remember, now all the maintenance is going to be for your pocket. And then you'll probably have some moving costs to go into the new property, maybe putting in an alarm system, doors, etc. So it's very exciting buying a new property, but we need to make sure that we have thought about all the different costs and that we have put aside some money to pay for those expenses so that we don't run into trouble halfway through this very exciting time of buying a new property. Up to now, any questions, anything that you would like to ask before I close off with the tip of the decade? Okay, so let me close off with this example. Let's say you buy a property of 1 million, interest rate is 6%. Your installments is over 20 years. Your installment amount is 8,360 rands per month. People will often tell you, no, but just increase that with 20% and you'll pay your house off very shortly. The problem is, if you and I have to be honest, can we just add 1,600 rand to that? No, probably not. So we end up paying 20 years this installment for this property. But what happens every year at most employers? You get a cost of living increase or adjustment for inflation's sake. So if inflation was 5%, CPI was 5%, the employer will say, well, we can increase your salary with 5%. That normally, unless interest rates change, does not affect your installment on your property. So your installments stay the same, but every year you get a slight increase in your salary. So our tip is, every year when you get your salary increase, just increase your installment with the same percentage. So all your expenses increase because of inflation. You get a higher income because of the cost of living adjustment. Now just include or increase your installment with that as well. The good news is, in year 12, if you just continue increasing your installment with that inflation every year, halfway between year 11 and year 12, you will pay off your property. 11 years, 9 months. And you're not worse off annually because you do get the salary increase, so I just increase my installment as well. And then, if you then take this money, you are now comfortable with an installment of 15,000 a month with all those increases. You go and buy a second property that you now rent out. You take the full installment and the rent and you plow it back into the property's mortgage. Your second property is paid off in year 20. So you'll have 2 paid off properties by the end of 20 years, where many people still have debt on their first property or the house that they live in. For me, ladies and gentlemen, you listening to me, if you just get this and you do this, it will make a big difference in your life. And you will be able to have 2 paid off properties in the time that most people struggle to pay off their house. And it will not adjust your living standard. With that said, I would like to ask you any questions at this stage, anything you would like to share, perhaps. Matthew, you're welcome.
Thank you. Maybe I missed out a part, but I didn't see anywhere where you spoke about the effect of deposit.
Yes, very good question. Of course, if you have if you can make a deposit, that makes a big difference. If I can share my slides again. In this instance, if you make a 20% deposit, it will just mean that your installment will be 20% less. So I did not spend too much time on that, because normally the banks will tell you if you're a first-time homeowner, they will not require you to make a big deposit. But of course, if you have had a house before, you can sell it, you have some money, I would definitely make as big a deposit as possible. But a little bit of a tip, I will tell the bank, I'm going to make the deposit, but I want it as a flexi reserve. That's the term that some of the banks call it. So I can withdraw it whenever I need it. Then you can even use that as your emergency fund. Matthew, I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I see my colleagues Estelle and John is also here. So just maybe as a last remark from my side, ladies and gentlemen, the invite is there. Contact us, ask us. We will gladly assist you in making this big choice. Yes, John. Oh, John just wanted to say hi.
Just saying hi.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all from me then. Joyce, you're welcome.
I wanted to ask, with the properties of where there are now new developments, what should one look out for? The ones that will say now they are still going to build the property and will only be able to use the property from the 1st of August or 1st of December. What should we look out for on those ones?
Very, very good question, Joyce. I would say there's 2 important things to look for. Number 1 is the trustworthiness of the contractor. Is it a reputable contractor that have done a lot of developments already, that you can go and look at the developments that they have done, that it should not be a fly-by-night. I would not buy a property off plan from somebody that I don't know, that have not done it before. So for me, can I trust the property developer? What developments have they done in the past? Can I go and look at that? That for me is the first thing. Then secondly, I would look at the neighborhood again where that development is. Is it the neighborhood where other property developments are taking place? So there's growth, things are happening there, people will like to live there. Or, I mean, we have a few like that here in Potchefstroom, where there was a huge developments, but 1 or 2 houses came up and nothing further. And now you don't want to be the only person living with all these fields around you. So I would say that for me would be the 2 most important things.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. Maybe a last question. Matthew, is your hand up again, or is it still from a previous time?
No, it's the last question.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yes, I just wanted to find out, I've had a lot of complaints concerning property in complexes. I'm not sure whether it's sectional titles versus stand-alone property. What is your take on that?
Property complexes, I think there's different pros and cons. On the pro side, definitely, it's often much more security, much better security. It's easier if you just want to lock up and go. You don't want to worry too much about big gardens, paying for the insurance and all of that. So there's some positives on that side. On the negative side, things that you must look out for is the financial statements of the board that's managing that property. Do they have money to pay all the expenses? Because at the end of the day, they just charge it from everybody who's living there. And then also, if you have young children, will there be a place for them to play, or are you going to live between a lot of older people that won't enjoy having small children around? So make sure about the financial statements of that property complex. Look at who else are staying there. Will you fit in that community with your family? I think that for me is two very important things. Maggie?
Hi, good afternoon.
Yes, you may ask your question.
Yes, my question will be a little bit of today's topic, but I just want to, in short, ask you buying versus building. Which one would you recommend? Just in short.
Very short, at this moment, building is much more expensive than buying. I think it's a buyer's market. Interest rates are still low, but you can still find, I think, properties for very good prices at the moment, where you will probably pay 20% to 30% extra if you want to build the same property. If I just take, General has just bought new offices. That was a house in Potchefstroom. We will easily have paid doubled if we wanted to build that same property.
Wow.
So at this stage, for me, it's just pure looking at the finances. It's cheaper to buy.
Okay, thank you so much.
And then Wonga asked, the 20 years payment term, does it have to be 20 years? Can it be determined based on one's affordability? Yes, Wonga, you can actually, the banks will allow you up to 30 years. So the standard in South Africa is often 20 or 30 years. Joyce?
Does that mean now that if you decide on 10 years or 15 years, we'll save now more money on the interest?
Yes, of course. How quicker you pay it off, the more you save on interest. And I see Wonga then ask on that, following with what Joyce said. Yes, you can make it close. You can make it shorter. I would still say register the term for 20 years, but you can pay it off quicker. My property, the house that I'm living in now, was for a 20-year period, and by around 15 years, we paid it off, but I keep my mortgage intact so that I can withdraw from that money should I need it for something. But I don't pay any interest anymore because there's basically no outstanding balance, and the banks do allow that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, ladies and gents, it was really a pleasure for me talking to you this afternoon. Please be on the watch out for our last session for the year. Next month, it's going to be presented by John. And I think it will be a nice one to look at over the Christmas time. And let me just quickly remind you about the topic. mental health and money matters. So making good over the holiday period with our money matters. So from my side then, you must have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy the last 20 minutes of your lunch. Maybe you can still get some coffee, and happy shopping for your properties. And please feel free to contact any of us should you want us just to bounce an idea or to do a calculation for you. Have a great afternoon. Oh, sorry, before I go, you still want to ask something? Yeah, you're fine. Okay, great. Have a lovely